Welcome to Disrupted Science, the occasional conversation between the authors of the upcoming book, How the Internet Disrupted Science. I'm Kent Anderson, and we're recording this on Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. Hey, Joy.
Hey, Kent.
Thanks for tuning in to our third episode. This week, we are going to take a deeper dive into what we had just discovered before recording last week and put it into context, and most importantly, give it a name. So the topic is, as you saw coming in here, gaslight journals. We're going to introduce what we think is a new term for a new kind of scientific journal. We've all heard of predatory journals. Those are the journals that want to take your money for very little to no review or work. There are also body snatcher journals, where good journals are snatched and turned predatory. We may talk about those in the future, but today we want to talk about this new breed we're calling gaslight journals.
That's right. This is the kind of journal that pushes a political narrative by making anti-science points of view look like science, and their outlets look like journals. We've come across a few examples recently, one called the Journal of the Academy of Public Health, which you might have heard of, that launched in January. That's funded by Real Clear Politics, a conservative news outlet. And Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the NIH, co-founded this one with another signatory of the infamous Great Barrington Declaration, which we'll explain in a second. Another two, the International Journal of Cardiovascular Research and Innovation and Science, Health Policy and the Law, are affiliated with the McCullough Foundation, which was started by Peter McCullough, cardiologist and internist who recently lost his board certification for spreading misinformation. He's also long been a Substack conspiracy champ.
Right. Authors of papers in these journals are often affiliated with known funders of misinformation, like the McCullough Foundation. Another one is the Brownstone Institute. These are usually run as verticals with these same people as authors and editors, making them essentially mouthpieces. In the case we're going to discuss, gaslight science ended up in influential congressional testimony.
So today we're going to show one way this works and why gaslight journals may be something we need to learn to identify as political operatives trying to swamp legitimate science with bad science and anti-science for their own personal gains.
Right. So some table setting, we mentioned the Great Barrington Declaration before. That was a call to let COVID burn through society without vaccines tamping down disease severity or spread. It supposedly gained thousands of signatures, but many were fraudulent when you took a closer look, like Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, and my personal favorite, Shyster McShysterface. There's a longer story here, but Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff spearheaded it. We'll talk about Kulldorff in a minute. At the same time, they were involved in a free speech case that went to the Supreme Court called Murphy versus Missouri, where they alleged that the government, by urging social media companies to be more responsible in their handling of COVID misinformation, had violated the First Amendment. They lost that case. Kulldorff was fired from Harvard and kicked off the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, which has been in the news recently. RFK recently fired everyone on it. That's why it made the news. Kulldorff has now been put in place to structure the grants for RFK Jr.'s Autism and Vaccines Research Project, working for Bhattacharya at the NIH. There seems to me to be a revenge tour underway.
That's right. So all these dudes are in the bag with anti-vaccine stuff and finding new causes for things like autism and metabolic syndromes. And they even say, we're going to know by September, and we're going to do it very, very quickly with their new crew at the NIH. And these are things, as most of you may know, that no scientists would ever say. These people aren't serious or scientific, but they really do know how to manipulate the information space, and gaslight journals are their new game, it seems.
Right. One interesting aspect is that it appears to be easier to do than ever, partially because decades of outsourcing and offshoring that scientific publishers have done has trained up vendors who can launch a journal, provide DOIs, and get manuscripts flowing almost overnight. Joy, you looked into this deeply. Can you walk us through what you were able to dig up?
Absolutely. So the International Journal of Cardiovascular Disease and Innovation began publishing in September of 2023 on the Recipro platform. And it's one of a portfolio of 25 journals that this publisher has on topics ranging the gamut from agriculture to business management, geoscience, nutraceuticals, fertility, computer science, etc. There's a little something for everyone. And they're a prepress and author services vendor based in India that advertises their ability to help authors get published and indexed in journals by major publishers such as Elsevier and Springer Nature and a few others. So going through the archives on this journal site, I could see that between September 2023 when they launched and September 2024, they published 15 papers on a quarterly basis, mostly reviews and mini reviews on a wide range of cardiology topics. It's really a catch-all, anything having to do with cardiology. And nothing really jumps out from these papers as being particularly groundbreaking or controversial. Just reviews on environmental factors and or a certain technique or just an overview of an understanding of a particular syndrome. But September 2024 signaled a potential turning point, however, because that's when they published an interview as an editorial with the incoming editor-in-chief, Peter McCullough. And the focus of this interview was about why he took the job. So let me quote. The journal presents a new opportunity with an innovative publisher unencumbered by mounting bureaucracy and conflict of interest with government agencies and corporations seeking to influence the flow of information to clinicians and the public on key advancements as well as safety concerns for patients with cardiovascular disease. End quote. How this
Can I jump in? Can I jump in on this?
Sure.
Just this quote, when I hear you say it, it's so interesting on a couple of fronts to me. One, it's laced with conspiracy, right? Everyone's against
I think
us.
it's screaming conspiracy.
Okay. Okay. Laced was a little light. And then the other thing is they make the public an audience, right? They obviously, that's not a scientific posture in my view, and I think in your view too, that science is for scientists. But they are saying the public is an audience, and that's kind of a red flag that I think people need to learn to watch for too.
Right. And then he just brings it all home and for patients with cardiovascular disease,
Right.
which really isn't
What a journal is
neither here
for.
nor there with what they're actually on about.
Right, right.
So how does this jive with what they've been publishing before? Well, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with anything they had published before. And so it was interesting to see what would come next with this new editorial regime. So over the next 6 months, they published another 20 papers, same types of mini reviews and reviews. And a lot of these papers throughout the archive had the same combinations of authors and mostly from India with a few from other countries around the world, scattered in as well. But there were two notable exceptions in the archives. One was a case study of a single 16-year-old male Japanese student who presented with myocarditis after receiving 2 COVID shots. And really the point of this case study was a signal to public health officials to consult with schools because the student presented with problems while he was in school. And so that was the point of the authors publishing this case study, is take a look at what's going on with students. And the other standout was this landmark study, myocarditis after SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 vaccination, epidemiology, outcomes, and new perspectives. So this one paper really stands out from the others. The scope of the topic, the language it uses, which is very loaded, very political, very opinionated. The extensiveness of the coverage, it has 341 references that it analyzes in this systematic review. But also, and most notably, the authors on this paper. So I'm going to talk you through the author list because it is a really important part of the story. Who are the characters in this play? They were all first-time contributors to this journal. And they've all been published elsewhere, and a lot of controversy has surrounded a number of papers that they've been attached to in recent years. So the first author, M. Nathaniel Need, is a researcher and science writer, and he focuses on nutritional epidemiology and public health. He's written a few books and a number of scientific articles, as well as magazine articles for the public. And he took a job with the McCullough Foundation this April. Next up is Jessica Rose. She's a Canadian independent analyst and researcher, and she's been focusing her efforts recently on interpreting the contents of the VAERS database, which is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System that's maintained by the FDA and CDC. This database was established in 1990 for clinicians and members of the public to report possible side effects of vaccines for further investigation as part of post-marketing surveillance, and to be able to hold manufacturers accountable if there are proven public adverse effects of the vaccines once they've been out in the population. But it's really like an unfiltered bug report in tech terms that's open to anyone to contribute to, including, most notably, vaccine injury lawyers are really populating this database with evidence to be used in claims in court.
Yeah, and if I can just interject one thing here that we're finding too is, and people are starting to react to, is these public databases are being plumbed to find problems. So things like the NHANES database, now some journals are saying they won't accept studies based on data dives into that. An orthopedic surgery group did the same thing with public data because it's just so susceptible to being manipulated by paper mills and bad actors. So I just wanted to interject that, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. So that's where Jessica Rose has been doing a lot of her work recently. The next author on the paper is William Makis. We've spoken about him before. He's another Canadian independent researcher, former physician who lost his medical license a few years back due to some professional misconduct. And he's reemerged on YouTube as a frequent guest, as a truth teller about some of his pet topics, which include repurposed drugs and turbo cancers. He's also one of the founding members of the Independent Medical Alliance, which is the nonprofit advocacy group who parlayed their initial anti-establishment views on COVID into their broader healthcare reform agenda that is very closely aligned with the MAHA agenda. So it's a cohort of former physicians and current physicians within this advocacy group that is influencing some of the overarching policies of MAHA. The next author is Kirk Milhone, and he was representing the paper in the news media. And he's a pediatric cardiologist and a minister from Texas. And along with his wife, runs a medical missionary foundation in addition to his local practice. Another author is Nicholas Holscher, who received his degree in epidemiology in 2024, just in time to become the leading comms guy for the McCullough Foundation. So he's out there explaining their research findings with calls to action to get mRNA vaccines banned. And you can find him on X, spreading the word. And you could also see him on YouTube on a recent episode of Ask Dr. Drew.
So I have to jump in here because I had completely forgotten about Dr. Drew. I forgot
Dr.
that he
Drew?
was a thing at some point. It's like seeing Arsenio Hall back on the scene.
Right. He was on the radio, K-Rock, on Loveline with Adam Carolla, giving advice to angsty teenagers. And then he ran the reality show Celebrity Rehab. I think that was on VH1. And that was in conjunction with a rehab facility that he was medical director of. But yeah, he's still going strong, and he's now MAHA strong. And he's in business with Peter McCullough and a few others with the wellness company. And so in addition to selling supplements and getting sponsored by various and sundry wellness products on his own platforms, the wellness company sells special supplements and these emergency medical kits that are purported to keep you safe next time something bad happens. So that little divergence to Dr. Drew came via Nicholas Holscher.
Right, right.
The epidemiologist communicator from McCullough. And then brings us to the senior author on the paper, who is also the editor-in-chief and founder of the funder, Peter McCullough himself. So taken together, all these authors, and the reason I took the time to go through the list one by one, they all have personal and financial motivations for fabricating a story around the mRNA vaccine, whether it's through their personal research interests as independent consultants, or if they have, financial stakes. And of note, there's not a single current academic affiliation among them. And yet they're using this paper in an academic journal to plant their alternative facts firmly in the scholarly record. And so while this journal does have DOIs, that's how this paper got certified and picked up by Google Scholar and posted on ResearchGate, it doesn't have an ISSN, which it would need if it were to be indexed, or if they had really any intention of using it like a proper academic journal.
Right, which they don't, because it's a Gaslight journal, right? The audience isn't other scientists, it's the media, policymakers, and ultimately members of the public who will donate to their foundations, subscribe to their Substack newsletters, drum up vaccine injury litigation, and buy their products. They've also primed the space over the past few years to make it more receptive, with Makis, McCullough, Holscher, and others in their orbit pushing out anti-vaccine and COVID-19 conspiracies via Substack. The momentum they were able to achieve there makes their narrative of emerging science and the corrupt establishment more plausible when their gaslight journals have quote unquote groundbreaking studies that defy established scientific findings or policies. They are crafty media performers. The Independent Medical Alliance's public outreach to worried moms and skeptical bros plays well in Sinclair Media's local markets. That's another conservative media outlet that is very susceptible to this kind of, open to this kind of information. And it's
Mhm.
all the more compelling when the news anchor announces a landmark new study, just as they would as if it were a paper in NEJM or JAMA. And then a PDF flashes up on the screen with the two-column layout, the abstract, whether that screen is on exercise machines in gyms or gas pumps in town or on YouTube.
That's right. So what they started on Substack years ago, in their own echo chamber, they're now taking the show on the road all the way out to Main Street, USA, right?
Yep, and to Congress. McCullough was a main witness in congressional testimony last month during a hearing. Ron Johnson, Wisconsin senator with a long history of inviting COVID-19 conspiracy theorists to testify, he organized a hearing called, very subtly, "The Corruption of Science and Federal Health Agencies, How Health Officials Downplayed and Hid Myocarditis and Other Adverse Events Associated with the COVID-19 Vaccines." Just before the hearing, the FDA called for a new black box warning on COVID-19 vaccines, including myocarditis risk for boys. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think these people are all in the bag. McCullough's Gaslight Journal and a paper he wrote, approved, and founded the funder of, was able to change government policy because now it had a clear path through what I'll call Gaslight Alley.
Right. It all just stacks up, it's a step-by-step playbook. That's if you know what to look for, it's pretty easy to follow. So here we are, in 2025 with a new breed of journals entering the landscape. Then they're specifically designed to churn out scientific looking information content, to influence, or I guess rather gaslight, um, policymakers and the public. And they're taking a grassroots, bottom up approach by going directly to local media outlets, and then, of course, top down through influencing policy in the government via congressional testimony.
Yep,
So, I mean, the Journal of the Academy of Public Health, uh,
it's
that's
another
very
one.
explicit in its mission and scope. When they launched to big fanfare, they told the whole world exactly who they are, what they were doing, and why they were doing it. Their editorial policy is clear, their acceptance criteria is clear. The content must come from members of our society that we just formed, and the content must support the cause of undermining the scientific establishment. This journal does have an ISSN, and they state on their website that they're looking forward to being indexed by Web of Science and Scopus and Google Scholar. And I'm assuming that they will be in PubMed and PubMed Central. That seems like a given.
Yeah,
The other one in this cohort is Science, Health Policy, and the Law. And that has some academic journal-like labels and page layouts. They have the familiar kind of navigation bar on the side of the articles, and they have a very strange uh, alphanumeric code with a dot in the middle that might look like a DOI, but it's really just a thing. Um, but it really looks and acts like the terribly implemented WordPress site that it is. They've got empty pages, they've got bad links, they even have that boilerplate stock text that says, please change this to what you really want to say.
I was hoping you were going with lorem ipsum, but that's good enough.
No, lorem ipsum would have made more sense. It said, you might want to put something here. And so it's cobbled together. The front page looks pretty impressive, but once a couple clicks in, doesn't take you to much, except for a shop window for a bunch of courses that you can take to be, I guess, to pay them to get certified in whatever crazy nonsense they're trying to teach people. And so that one is, it's not hard to tell that it is not an academic journal, like any of the ones that we're used to. And so the International Journal of Cardiovascular Research and Innovation, however, is technically just another one of tens of thousands of international journals on scholarly platforms that are pumping out open access papers for whoever wants to be published, needs to be published for whatever reason. And so that is a lot more deceptive than the Real Clear Journal or the WordPress journal, because this one is kind of hidden in plain sight. And it is connected through the platform and through the DOI system. So it'll be interesting to watch how the McCullough crew at the helm of this journal, take it forward and continue to leverage their ability to be right there in the ecosystem.
Yep, absolutely. And I think when we were talking about and kind of putting our heads around this idea of gaslight journals as a genre or an emerging trend, it also made it clear why these same people in RFK are denigrating strong journals, right? They want to make the public doubt NEJM and JAMA and the Lancet in order to give their gaslight journals room to operate and reinforce their narrative of being the heroes who are finally coming to tell the truth, even though they are just gaslighting people. It's really gaslight all the way down. In addition to this, their plan seems to be to generate enough articles to fit their narrative and achieve what they call consensus in order to stymie actual science and get their agenda to dominate. In other words, I think they're going to push gaslight journals and gaslight science as hard as they can, as fast as they can. After all, they have to tell us by the cause of autism by September, right? So their summer semester's already fully gaslit.
So what does this mean to us, and kind of what can or should we do with this information? Reflecting on what's making the headlines in scholarly publishing these days, most of the focus seems to be around trying to automate ways to counteract paper mills, and detect scientific fraud at scale, and with manipulated images and things like that. And then also a lot of post-publication spot checking to try to clean up things that were published that don't hold water. So that's a lot of effort looking at across the landscape at some big problems that are happening with large volumes and at scale. But what's interesting about this case and notable is it really demonstrates how a single ember can start a wildfire, right? The success of this academic boondoggle, quite frankly, will likely be replicated. And so I think we should be looking for some upstream interventions where we can. The people who are controlling the decision making around platforms and identifiers in particular, because the main drivers, it seems, for them to even be bothering to play around in the academic journal space are our certifications, our indexing, meaning your citation, your DOI, and the legitimate commercial databases that make you discoverable, i.e. Scopus and Web of Science
And Google Scholar. I think
and Google
that's
Scholar.
that's one of the biggest and least governed of them all. So, yeah, so we wanted to identify this new type of journal for you. We're calling them Gaslight journals. We wanted to create awareness, especially among certifying bodies, pardon me, like the ISSN, Clarivate, Scopus, Google Scholar, as well as potentially stronger certifying bodies, the ones that could really beef up, like Crossref. We think that the board there needs to take up issues like this about who gets a DOI, how your DOI is being leveraged as a visual trademark almost, and it's unmanaged. We might talk about that tomorrow. But we also think, or next week, sorry, consumers need to be aware there are wolves in sheep's clothing trying to make unproven claims look like they've been published in legitimate journals, while those same people are also delegitimizing independent journals. There will be a post up on the Geyser about this tomorrow, so there will be some more detail there, links and all that stuff, but we wanted to make you aware and give you a little bit of a deep dive and try a new format. So now we're going to move on to discoveries of the week.
Yes, let's shift gears.
Yeah. So do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay. Just
Um,
remember, you wrote to mine, so don't mess up.
uh, I got you, Ken.
Okay, I know.
So I saw a great program on Virginia Public Media a couple days ago about environmental toxins in food supply. And at first, I really didn't want to tune in because I've been swamped with that all day long doing research in the scientific publishing space. But unlike a lot of what we're hearing on the news and what's coming across in most of the media, this story was based on real science, and there is a simple solution. So it was about the work that the Wildlife Center of Virginia is doing to treat bald eagles that have lead poisoning. And they're getting it from eating deer carcasses that have been left in the woods by hunters. So they dress the deer and then they leave whatever's left over. And because the habitats for the eagles have changed, there a lot more of them are living farther away from the water and in the woods, and so they're scavenging more than they're fishing. And the center was starting to receive reports of injured bald eagles and that their vets take in to help rehabilitate. And they found that a lot of them were uh, displaying clinical signs of lead toxicity. And so they were treating these eagles as best as they can, but they wanted to get to the source of it. And they put together a study with a local school, a STEM science teacher and his students, as well as with hunters to collect samples. And they took the samples, they analyzed them, they x-rayed them, they tested the toxicity and matched it to what they were finding in the eagles, and they could tie the two together, that these eagles are eating lead-laced remains. And the nicest part of this kind of horrible story is the way that the people participating came together, and that there is a pretty simple solution, which is to recommend to hunters that they use copper bullets instead of lead, uh, which is a pretty simple swap, or just, bury what you're not going to take home with you. And they had representatives from the hunting community who were horrified to find out that, they were causing these problems in with the eagles. And it was just a real refreshing treat to, see something local, people working together. people that probably wouldn't have much in common,
Right.
scientists and hunters, but they found a common cause and they're working on it together and they were able to get that into the public. So that was my find of the week.
That's fantastic. And speaking of refreshing, so my discovery of the week is that non-alcoholic beers are good now. So Guinness Zero is fantastic. I gave one to a neighbor of mine who loves Guinness, and he tried it after it was nicely chilled, and he loved it. So Stella Artois, Heineken, Sam Adams, they're all just indistinguishable. I'm not an IPA guy, so I can't attest to those, but everything coming out so far just tastes like actual beer, which is great because you're doing yard work in the middle of the day and you don't want the buzz, but you want to have the refreshment of a beer, or what we might call beer soda. You can do it, and it tastes great. If you're the designated driver, you can still look like you're a party animal and, be totally sober when you leave the place and drive safely. And I think you can buy any non-alcoholic beer right now with confidence. And to me, that's a big improvement on things. So those are our discoveries of the week. That's it for this episode. If you have other ideas that you want us to talk about, if you can give us feedback on this new format, we'd love to hear your thoughts. We think this is a good way to do it with single topics, but let us know. You can reach us at disruptedscience, all one word, @gmail.com with your ideas, or give us feedback on our YouTube channel. And thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, everyone.